Thank you. And thank you, Elder Commanda, for welcoming us to the traditional and unceded territories of the Anishinaabe peoples here in Ottawa. I'm very grateful to be here today. With that introduction, there's kind of this anticipation I might reveal some of the secrets that I've learned, but that is not the case, actually. But it is important to come together, I think, in places like this. As Michelle underlined, we did this in 2018, and if you think about the period between 2018 and today, we, with everybody in this room and many others elsewhere, have, I think, learned a great deal, experimented in many ways, and tried to tackle what feels to us to be an increasingly insurmountable problem we're faced with in terms of trying to solve the challenges before us in the housing market. Je suis président du Conseil, comme vous l'avez appris à l'instant, depuis 6 ans. Mais mon engagement dans le secteur canadien de l'habitation date de plus longue durée que cela. Je ne vous dirai pas combien de temps, mais ça fait pas mal d'années que j'œuvre dans le secteur. Et je me sens à l'aise d'affirmer que l'attention portée au logement, à l'abordabilité du logement au Canada est à un niveau très élevé. Heureusement, nous observons également une forte hausse de la quantité d'énergie consacrée à ce secteur, en tant dans les OSBL, dans le secteur privé et dans les divers paliers de gouvernement. A lot of this energy is coming from the federal government of Canada, and particularly the Office of the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Il a travaillé sans relâche à l'élaboration et la promotion des efforts de son gouvernement en matière de logement. Et il n'a pas peur de reconnaître que les gouvernements fédéraux précédents, y compris les gouvernements libéraux, ont été moins actifs que nécessaire. He's been open in saying that he envisages an even bigger federal role in housing in this country, and he's here to talk about that today. So I ask you all to join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, the Federal Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, the Honourable Sean Fraser.
Gary, thanks very much. Yeah, appreciate it. Hello and welcome everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. It's so great to be here with so many friendly faces. Since I've been here, there's a few I recognized. Tim with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I understand Ray with CHRAs in the crowd. Carol with FCM. Kevin with the Whole Builders. A number of mayors and municipal officials from across the country. It's really terrific to be here with you today. As so many people in this room know all too well, the housing crisis isn't just some academic concept that's discussed in classrooms. This is a lived reality for Canadians from different walks of life, and it's impacting us all, not just as individuals, but collectively as Canadians. When I think about how the housing crisis impacts everyday people, I think about someone I know my entire life, lives in a small town in Nova Scotia. It's a college town. She's an aspiring artist. Her husband does home repair and works for a roofing company. They just had their 4th kid, who, by the way, is a terrific, beautiful baby girl. Their landlord just told them that he had to renew their mortgage when interest rates are much higher than they were just a few years ago. The message that they got was their rent was going up $1,200 a month. Not quite double, but almost double what it was just a year ago. If they can't afford that increase this spring, they're going to have to find a new place to live. At a time when they ought to be spending every spare moment that they have with a beautiful baby girl who's just a few months old, they're concerned about having to go back to work full-time so they don't lose their apartment. In another case, there's a guy I've been friends with more or less my whole life. 20 years ago, he was a national finalist for a young entrepreneur contest right across Canada. He's run into some severe challenges over the past few decades with mental health and addictions. And because of this, he's lived in communities without reliable access to affordable housing. I'm sad to say that he spent too many nights without a roof over his head, and we're not benefiting from the potential that he holds, despite the fact that he comes from a very supportive family. There's students that I meet with all the time, right across Canada, who tell me they're making a choice between living in an overcrowded and sometimes unsafe place to live, or living an hour away from campus, so they have to commute in a way that eats away at their ability to build networks, to spend time learning, to advance their career potential, and to make friends that would last a lifetime. These are the kinds of things that we're starting to see more and more often. La plupart de ces personnes sont issues de la classe moyenne, mais nous ne devons pas perdre de vue que la crise du logement a un impact unique sur les plus vulnérables. et en particulier sur les communautés historiquement marginalisées, notamment les communautés racialisées, la communauté autochtone et les personnes qui ont grandi dans une situation de pauvreté, entre autres. It's not just individuals who are impacted, because when communities go without access to adequate housing, affordable or otherwise, we collectively suffer the impacts. When young people can't afford a place to live in our cities, our communities become less vibrant places to call home. When employers can't find the talent that they need to grow their businesses, the entire economy suffers as a result. Despite the enormity of these challenges, I remain optimistic that we can, and that we will, solve these problems. The reason I'm optimistic is not because some solutions have dawned upon me in my office in Parliament Hill behind closed doors. It's because I have the opportunity to work with people across the country who are actually doing the work, who are implementing these solutions today in their own backyard. Many of those people are actually sitting here in the room today. What I've learned from my engagements with all of you and in traveling across the country, there's a few things that have become very clear to me that we need to do in order to actually address the national housing crisis. First, at risk of stating the obvious, we've got to build more homes. Now, that's an easy thing to say. It's a little trickier to do. You'll see that we started down this path by helping reduce the cost of home building, by removing the GST on new apartment construction. At a time of high interest rates, we know that we can speed up the process of home building by offering low interest loans to home builders. I think about the work that leaders like Marianne Alto are doing in Victoria, Barry Verbanovich in Kitchener, Mike Savage in Halifax, in my home province of Nova Scotia, to actually make it easier to build homes in cities right across this country. Lorsque les villes construisent des logements où les services existent déjà, nous pouvons réduire les pressions de coûts pour les personnes qui vivent actuellement dans nos villes et créer plus d'espace pour ceux qui veulent venir apporter le talent à l'avenir. It's unthinkable to me that in a housing crisis, we've made it illegal to build the kinds of homes in most neighborhoods in this country that are actually going to help bring the crisis to an end. Now, some of the solutions may lie with other levels of government, but I think that we have a role to play as a federal government. I think about a program like the Housing Accelerator Fund, which has exceeded my very high expectations. Since September, we've now reached agreements, 179 agreements, with governments who want to do more, who want to increase their ambition. These agreements have been signed in every province, every territory in this country, and it's going to make it easier to build homes in every part of this country. Now, you might have thought 6 months ago it would have been impossible to have the rapid upzone of Canadian housing as a whole, but we're getting pretty close. It's, in my view, not enough just to change the way that cities build homes. We have to think about how we can actually change the way homes themselves are built. We can't expect to meet this challenge head-on using the same tactics and technologies that we've used for decades. We need to take this newfound ambition and drive and unlock the tools like we never have before. Factory-built homes, mass timber, panelization, modular homes, we need it all. And at the same time, we need to train and grow the workforce to get this job done. But as we build more homes to help end the housing crisis, we can't forget that the most vulnerable are disproportionately impacted because the housing crisis does not impact all of us equally. My own view is that in a country as wealthy as Canada, it's completely unacceptable that anyone has to go to sleep without a roof over their heads. Now, we went through, in Canada, a decades-long experiment, where we saw the federal government, of different partisan persuasion, by the way, simply wash its hands of the need to invest in affordable housing. Now, that changed in 2017 with the introduction of the National Housing Strategy, and it's made a positive difference, but we know that we need to do more. And contrary to what some of my colleagues may say in the House of Commons, my view is that in order to address the needs of the most vulnerable, the federal government must continue to invest directly in the construction of affordable housing in every part of this country. What amazes me is that this is controversial. It shouldn't be a tough choice. Because helping our neighbors is the right thing to do. But if that's not what motivates you, you should still reach the same conclusion based on the economic argument alone. The cost of addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, the cost of preventative measures, is far less than the cost we all face if we're paying for innumerable ER visits, pressure on our mental health services, the increased costs that are incurred by courts, by law enforcement, and perhaps most notably, the economic potential that is not reached with people who could put their skills to use to help drive the economy forward because they're too busy trying to find a place for themselves and their families to live. Now, when you support someone's ability to have a safe and stable place to live, their social and economic outcomes improve, and across society, this has the potential to actually help pay for itself. Alors que nous construisons davantage de logements, y compris des logements abordables, nous devons également reconnaître que les jeunes de ce pays sont aujourd'hui confrontés à des situations très différentes de celles de leurs prédécesseurs. There's a generational divide right now in this country between people who got into the housing market at a time when that was a reasonable thing to do, regardless of how much money your parents had in their bank account. Now, look, I'm still in my 30s for at least a few more months. I can tell you that everybody I talk to, my age and younger, that I spend time speaking with, has a very, very different perspective on housing than everybody older than me. When I talk to young people in this country, we don't spend much time talking about the dream home that they may find themselves in one day. They're worried about whether they can keep running the place that they have now, or whether they need to take on another roommate in order to pay rent this month. They're wondering if they'll have to change careers or even leave the place that they call home just so they can find a place to live that they can actually afford. Now, I don't know about all of you. I'm just not willing to accept that an entire generation of young people will never be able to own a home in this country. And for people who are happy to rent, we have to create opportunities for them to find a place that they can actually afford in the city where they want to live, where they want to pursue economic opportunities. Now, if we do all these things, we can, and we will, solve the national housing crisis. But when I say we, I mean all of us. It's not just the federal government. It's every level of government. Every home builder, every nonprofit, every housing advocate, every Canadian who cares about making sure that their neighbor has a roof over their head and that their kids can afford a place to call home. When we work together, we can identify the solutions that will actually end the national housing crisis. So if I can leave you with a message, it's this. The people I've had the opportunity to meet with know what the answers to our problems are. Many of them are sitting in this room. Take the opportunity that you have today and tomorrow to engage with the experts in your field, because the solutions exist, and in many cases, they're sitting in the chair next to you right now. To the home builders who are looking to scale up, find somebody in the room who's been through what you're trying to do. Ask them for their advice. To those who are on the front lines of serving the most vulnerable, first let me say thank you. We owe you an enormous debt of gratitude after the past few years, what you and your teams have been through. We all depend on the work that you do to ensure that our neighbors are treated with basic dignity and respect. To the municipalities who are looking to be more ambitious, when it comes to home building, the homes for your residents now and the people who are going to move there tomorrow, find leaders who are actually implementing the reforms to achieve progress when it comes to building more homes in their communities. Now, we're going to solve Canada's national housing crisis, and we're going to do it together. But to get there, we need to build more homes, and we need to build them by the millions. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Mr. Fraser, thank you very much. And I think I think many in this room will really feel grateful and encouraged by the commitment you've shown to housing and the federal role in and the ongoing federal role in housing. So thank you for that. It's also now my pleasure to invite Tim Richter to the stage. Tim is the founder, president, CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and he's also the co-chair of the National Housing Council. This is advertised as a fireside chat. It's actually a low-carbon fireside chat. And I think after which there will be an opportunity for some questions from the audience. So, gentlemen.
Yeah, well, thank you, Minister. Thanks for the opportunity, folks. I know as Derek mentioned, there's going to be a chance for everybody to ask some questions. Like, I got 1,000, so I could keep us going all morning. I know you have some as well, so use the app and you'll get a chance to fire a couple of questions in here. But might as well, you know, like I said, I got lots of questions for you.
I hope to have a few answers.
Oh, I hope you do too. But I think that, you know, for me, and I think for a lot of folks in the room, the elephant in the room is really, we all know you're working on a new housing strategy. I think we're all dying to know what's in it. We know that the budget's coming in a month from tomorrow. Care to share?
Let me call Christian very quickly.
Yeah.
Look, so we are putting together a more comprehensive response to some of the housing challenges that exist in this country, and over the next number of weeks there'll be more that we'll be sharing publicly. But you should expect it to reflect a few key themes. First, the measures that we need to implement that's going to help us build more homes. The first thing is to focus on actually reducing the cost of home building. We can do that through tax measures like the GST we've removed, through low-cost financing, through pursuing new and exciting initiatives around providing federal lands for affordable housing. We also need to make it easier to build homes by encouraging cities to adopt measures that are within their purview that we may be able to have an impact on, by making it easier to build more homes near services, infrastructure, and opportunities that already exist, more apartments near post-secondary institutions, more apartments near transit systems, which will both help the feasibility of the transit system as well as the people who live there. And we need to make investments and work with the home building sector to scale up the mass production of homes. Beyond building more homes, we have to advance measures that are going to help support the most vulnerable. This includes directly investing for the long term in affordable housing. It includes making sure that we're looking out for people who are uniquely impacted, empowering Indigenous communities to advance solutions developed by Indigenous communities for Indigenous peoples, and ensuring that there are other communities that have their needs met, including veterans for whom the Government of Canada has a unique and fiduciary obligation to look out for. Because in my own view, if we can afford to send our citizens to war, we can afford to take care of them when they come home. After we address those two issues, the last major theme is really tackling the issue of generational fairness, making sure that young people in this country can afford a place to rent if they choose, and make sure that the dream of home ownership doesn't escape them. Those are the big themes you should expect to see out of our housing plan, and we'll have more to say over the next number of weeks.
Oh, that's good. So, you know, I think the key to any really good strategy is having some clarity on the outcome you want to achieve, right? Having a vision. And I'm wondering, you know, what does success in the housing strategy look like? Like, can you paint us a picture of what Canada looks like with a successful housing strategy?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the risks that we often run as governments is that we tend to measure success based on what the government is going to achieve. And I think it's essential, and sorry to everyone who I've had my back to over here. One of the things that I think we need to do is shift our perspective to ask, what does success look like for Canadians and for Canadian communities? When it comes to the rental market, one of the metrics that, actually I think it was Michael Brooks who's in the room today, who's sort of shifted my perspective on this. It's not just about the number of units that we can build, it's about making sure that if somebody loses access to the place that they're living now, they can actually find another place to live at the same price that they were paying before. I think about the story that I shared about a young family having to pay $1,200 more in a college town. That's not feasible. The likely outcome is they're going to have to move away from the community where they're actually working today. That's not a reasonable outcome. When I think about home ownership, we should be able to envision a world where young people are actually to put away a little bit of cash for a down payment so they may own a place one day. And I don't think it's too much to ask that everyone in Canada has a place to live. We should not accept, I think it would be a moral failure to accept that chronic homelessness has to be part of life in a country as wealthy as Canada. So if I ask myself, what does success look like? It's not going to be that the government has accomplished X, Y, Z. It's that people are going to be able to afford a place to live, whether that's a low-income family who has the benefit of an affordable housing project, whether it's a young professional who can find a place to rent in the city where they got their first job out of school, or whether it's a family who's actually able to buy a home in the community where they grew up, if that's what they want. So it's really meeting the needs and aspirations of Canadians at a granular level that will define success more than it is a particular policy outcome that the government generates.
Yeah, it's such a good, I think the generational fairness question is really important. As I think about like my own family, my eldest son is a paramedic and he can't afford to own. We're trying to figure out how we can help them get on that property ladder. So
just on that piece, I had a conversation, it was in Barrie, Ontario a couple of days ago, and one of the police officers, she came up to me after an event and said that her son's 24 years old, is with his partner, they're looking at getting married. The conversation they're having right now is whether they need to move and start a family in another community. And his mom's heartbroken. She's raised in the community, raised her kids in that community, wants to see her grandkids raised in that community. So this is, it's just a very real and human impact behind these conversations that we need to understand if we're going to actually advance solutions.
Yeah, well, but the scale of the problem, I think, is, and you talk about, we need millions of homes. Well, that's, we're talking trillions of dollars. Like at least a couple trillion, which means you're gonna, like, unless the government has a couple of $1 trillion under the mattresses, I don't know. But,
yeah, I'll check.
Well, you'll check, but you know, we're going to need to attract more private housing investment in housing in Canada. You touched on the GST, but like how do you plan to attract more housing investment, and how do you create that stable environment today for those that have already made investments?
One of the things I'm thinking back to the first week I got my job out of law school at a law firm, and the lesson that one of the senior partners came and discussed with all the articling students was that you're going to find a lot of people you'll build relationships with, and you'll come to trust certain people more than others, but you should never trust anybody more than you should trust their self-interest. And though it's not necessarily the political perspective I adopted as an MP, there is some truth to the fact that you got to make it in somebody's interest to make an investment if you're actually going to encourage them to do it at scale. We need to make sure that when it comes to market housing, that we're actually creating an economic equation where investors are saying, this makes sense. I can actually make my money back. I can do that by helping the government advance measures that are going to make it more cost effective to say, yes, I'm going to invest in Canada as opposed to some other country. We can do that by offering low cost financing at a larger scale to people who are currently looking at the pro forma that doesn't pencil out. Even though it did when they applied for the permit, by the time it's approved, there's actually no economic case to be made without building taller or doing the project differently. In addition, you've got to create a sense of certainty that you can get through a process and be approved to build in a timely way. That's where some of the investments we're making in cities, not only to zone for different kinds of housing, but speed up the permitting process is going to help. And we've got to look at different measures as well to tap into money for non-market housing that people want to invest in, but currently can't justify because they're not doing it for charitable purposes. There are foundations that are looking to invest significant capital in this country right now, but need a little bit of help from different levels of government to make it a reality. So when we can actually make the economic case work, we can drive the kind of change we want to see. When it comes to communities who are wrestling with homelessness, who are dealing with a shortage of affordable housing, there is always going to be a role, in my view, for public actors, for different levels of government to make investments. But to your point, this is a multi-trillion-dollar challenge to meet the supply gap if you are to examine CMHC's numbers. And that's going to demand that we continue to invest as a government, but we have to pull in private capital if we're going to be serious about any of the crisis.
Yeah, for sure. So in the, you mentioned in your remarks the National Housing Strategy, and the National Housing Strategy Act of 2019 sort of outlined the progressive realization of the right to housing as the housing policy of Canada. So I'm curious, what does the right to housing mean to you, and how is that shaping how you think about your housing policy?
So the right to housing to me, and I think it's important that we actually engage in rights-based languages. It's not okay to me that people in Canada, a country that it makes the rest of the world blush when they look at the abundance of natural resources that we have, the economic opportunities that we have. It's not acceptable to me that there are people who don't have a place to live. And the starting point for me is that everyone in this country should be entitled to a safe and affordable place to live. We also have to acknowledge that we don't live in a fictional utopia. We have a real challenge that we need to address in order to get there. This is where the progressive realization of the right to housing is important to understand. We need to have a plan to take us from where we are now to the place that we ought to be. And right now, we've got too many people who aren't living with an experience where they have a safe and affordable place to live. So to me, what I think in order to breathe life into that right, what we owe Canadians is a pathway to demonstrate that we are in fact on track to end chronic homelessness in this country and to ensure that everybody has a roof over their head.
That's great. So a couple of years ago, in I think it was probably the 2022 budget, the federal government committed about $4 billion to urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing, and that some of that, I guess, to about $250 million has been distributed to through an organization now called Nietzsche. But is there any update on when that money is going to get out the door?
I expect that, so for those who aren't following the file on a day-to-day basis, we've made a decision to move forward to have a significant portion of this fund administered by a national centre developed for Indigenous peoples, by Indigenous peoples, with some funding dedicated to distinctions-based organizations so communities can support members of their communities who no longer live in those communities. The next step in the process is to actually select the entity that will form the centre and be able to administer beyond the first tranche that Nietzsche is currently administering. We expect that we'll be able to have a decision within a matter of weeks on who will form the centre. But after the centre is formed, they'll obviously be interested in moving quickly to meet the intense need facing Indigenous peoples who are living in urban, rural, and northern environments across Canada. But one of the lessons that I've taken, not only from my work in housing over the last 7 or 8 months now, but from my time as an MP, is that the federal government doesn't always know best when it comes to meeting the needs of Indigenous peoples in this country. We've got a long history that proves that to be the case. I think about my home province of Nova Scotia. The biggest improvement I've seen when it comes to perhaps any policy area has been education with Mi'kmaq communities in my home province. There was a decision taken years ago to pull the education system out of the hands of the provincial government and to put it in the hands of Indigenous communities themselves. What we ended up seeing was the graduation rate for Mi'kmaq students in Nova Scotia went from the mid-30s to the low 90s, virtually on par with everybody else. When we trust Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities to advance solutions for the people and communities they know best, we'll deliver better outcomes. So I'm not going to sit here and tell whoever the centre may be how to do their job. My job is to empower them with the resources that they need to implement the solutions that they already know exist.
Awesome. All right, we're going to ask one more question, but then we're going to open it up to all of your questions. So if you haven't got them in yet, get them in. We'll have a chance to ask a few of those in a quick second. Now, you're also the Minister of Infrastructure, which is handy as you're building all this new housing, because all these new homes are going to require some infrastructure, new roads, sewers, schools. And municipalities are saying they don't have tons of capacity to support this infrastructure beyond adding things like development charges that ultimately makes that new housing more expensive. So have you contemplated the costs of the infrastructure to support all this new housing?
Obviously. If the question is, have I contemplated? Of course. One of the things that's essential for us to understand is we're not trying to build storage units for people to sleep in at night. We're trying to build complete communities where Canadians can reach their full potential. Nobody wants to live in a building that doesn't have access to a park, doesn't have the basic services that we've come to expect. We want to know when we turn the tap on, water comes out. We know that we can't live in the middle of a field that isn't attached to services. We actually need to have access to a transit system or to a road to actually get to the place where we work, where we play, and where we enjoy life as human beings. When we adopt the mindset that we're trying to build complete communities that are designed to help people thrive rather than just cars move around, it demands that we make investments in infrastructure. Over the course of our time in government, we've invested many tens of billions of dollars in these kinds of projects. We've continued to support communities through the Canada Community Building Fund, through Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund to prevent the impacts of climate change from harming our communities. We are going to look for continued ways to support some of the water and wastewater treatment needs of communities, so those who are on the verge of growth but don't have the capacity are able to. And we have to continue to make the kinds of investments that allow people to live in a community that's worth living in. So you can't simply just build structures with doors and rooms. You need to have a view of how those doors and rooms are part of a broader community where people are set up for success.
All right. Now, I think we've got a chance to take a few questions, and on the magic of CMHC, some questions will appear on the screen here in a second, I'm hoping. If not, I got a bunch more. We got a question for the minister? Everybody check put them in the app? I'm sure we've had a chance.
There is action on the screen up here, so something's happening.
Is there something?
Oh, okay. So we're not seeing down here what's up there.
What role can the government play in controlling multi-use operating costs. For example, property and liability costs have been increasing.
Sorry, what's the question?
Not on the con.
I'm going to strain my neck trying to look around.
What role can the federal government control multi-residential operating costs? For example, property and liability costs like there we go.
Yeah, so look, it's a fascinating question. Our view as a government right now is we want to do what we can to help address the need to build more homes. We don't have a lot of federal programs that go into running the operations of buildings in perpetuity, but we do believe that we have a role in reducing the input costs that go into building a new apartment, for example, in order to make the operation of that project feasible. If we adopted the view that we're going to be investing a finite pool of resources into the perpetual operation of the buildings that are going up, we're going to accomplish a lot less. So we want to work with communities who can actually make the economics of a building work if they get support with the cost of building up front. This is where things like federal lands can come into play. This is where low-cost financing and tax measures can come into play. So the needs of, it's hard when you're designing policy at the federal level to deal with the operating costs when you're dealing with property and liability, which can vary immensely, not just from province to province, but from community to community within provinces. So our view is that we want to do everything we can to reduce the cost of building to allow more to go ahead, but we want to make sure we're investing in projects that can be self-sustaining to a significant degree, so we can get more done with the same pool of resources rather than putting all of our eggs in the operational basket after something goes up.
You know, but that raises a really good point, because you talk about it from the federal perspective, and you know, I've long made an argument the federal government needs to lead on housing, but that doesn't mean you have to hold the bag for the whole thing, right? Like, housing is shared jurisdiction. How do you pull the provinces into this conversation? Because a lot of them, you know, speaking as an Albertan, perhaps I shouldn't say that, but you know, when the federal money comes in, provincial money goes out. So how do you lever that provincial investment as well?
Look, I think there's a huge opportunity here, because you're absolutely right. Despite my view of the federal role on this, we can encourage other levels of government, both at the provincial and municipal level, to increase their ambition or do more where resources have previously gotten in the way. The Housing Accelerator Fund has been an enormous learning opportunity for me. It has exceeded extremely high expectations that I had for the fund. But what we saw was there is a lot of communities in this country who want to solve the housing crisis in their own backyard. And with a little bit of federal incentive and federal leadership to say, we want you to do more, and we'll put cash on the table if you choose to do more, we've seen a change in attitude. There are other levels of government, provincial governments within 20 minutes of us announcing changes to the GST in September in London, a number of my counterparts or premiers across the country were texting me saying, right there with you, we're going to join the effort too. When you actually can adopt a Team Canada approach and sometimes put shared priorities on the table, where we say, if we do X, we expect you're going to do Y, it turns a lot more people are willing to do Y if they're not going it alone. So my view is strategically deploying federal resources in a way that creates an expectation that we can reach partnerships with other levels of government, can bring about a change to policy areas that are typically outside of the purview of the federal government, including potentially some of these areas.
Yeah. So the next question we have here is, what do you see as the future of housing research funding?
So look, good question. It's always strange because research has the opportunity to touch on a number of different portfolios, and we sometimes have the bad habit in government, not just the current government, but across different levels of government, to looking at things in a siloed way. There's some really strong research that goes on within CMHC and some of the projects that are being funded as a result of the supply challenge, for example, or uncovering solutions that can be scaled up right across the country. I'm looking at some of the work that's done out of UBC, for example, about building kits that are designed to meet building code and potentially municipal approval processes right off the get-go. We kind of learn by doing, and we innovate by having a little bit of support to test new ideas. But in addition, we need to continue to support through our trilateral research agencies, the work that's going on at institutions across this country, and then have them partner with the levels of government or industries who are actually going to get homes built. There's a massive opportunity. I think about some of the work that's going on in my own community, both at a local university and community college, that's uncovering new solutions for rural communities when it comes to home building. So through a mix of the work that CMHC does and the funding that we run through our research agencies, there's a massive opportunity for us to uncover the solutions that we exist. But let's not pretend we don't know about a lot of the solutions already. We need to make sure we're leveraging and mustering the political will to leverage the solutions that are well known to us and to achieve them at scale. We should never take our foot off the gas when it comes to scientific research and curiosity-driven research about what the new solutions are going to be for the next generation, but we can't slow down when it comes to implementing the solutions that we already know exist today as well.
Yeah. So the next question, and I'm going to add a question to the question, but the first part is, how do we rapidly scale up the percentage of non-market housing, nonprofit co-op social housing across the country? But the other part is, one of the things that the National Housing Council found when we examined the National Housing Strategy is that most of the housing created by, the affordable housing created by the National Housing Strategy wasn't actually affordable to those who need it the most. So how do we scale up rapidly this non-market housing, but ensure that it's affordable to the people who need it, specifically people who are living on income support or disability, who can't afford or will never afford to live in market housing?
So look, at risk of oversimplifying, the answer is to fund it. There's not a market solution to non-market housing. It's why it's called non-market housing. To your point, I think sometimes there's confusion, and governments can be responsible for the confusion about some of our program that makes housing more affordable and affordable housing for low-income families. It's still a good thing if we're building the housing supply through the apartment construction loan program, for example, which is going to have more units come on below market, but that's still out of reach for an awful lot of people, despite it being a good thing. Canada right now has ballpark 4% of the homes in this country, but 16.5 million homes, 4%, a little less, exists outside of the market. That's half of the OECD average. If we want to actually get to a place, and about a little more than 10% of Canadians are in low-income households, for 4% of the homes in this country are outside of the market, 10.6% of Canadians are in low-income households, there's going to be people who don't have a place that they can afford to live. This is where we have to avoid the mistakes of the past. 30 years of the federal government not making investments in affordable housing for low-income families has created a direct and predictable consequence that we are paying for today. And we're not just paying for it through the money that we need to invest in affordable housing. We're paying for it through missed opportunities for vulnerable people to actually escape a generational cycle of poverty. It's not fair, it's not right, and we can change it, but we have to commit to the long term to investing as a federal government and bringing other levels of government on board to actually build non-market housing that's going to be kept in a non-market scenario, whether it's cooperative housing, whether it's nonprofit housing, whether it's public housing. But if we pull profit out of the equation and realize that non-market housing is essential for the public good it creates, we can escape some of the challenges for millions of Canadians who are living without access to adequate affordable housing today.
So I see there's a gentleman here. I'm trying to, I'll ask you to keep it brief.
Yeah.
Fire away.
My apologies, Will Goodon, Minister of Housing for the Red River BC government. Real briefly, and it was hard to figure out the app, and apologize for that. Not as young as they used to be. The Red River BC government has had some great successes, and thank you very much to the Liberal government. Since 2018, we've had our own specific housing funding and doing things like our first-time home buyers program, where we're literally 4 families away from having first-time home buyers of 1,000 families in new homes. Other things like our repairs program is going really, really well. But one of the things, and I appreciate what you said, Minister. I appreciate what you said, Minister, about the Indigenous communities know their needs, and that's absolutely the case for the Red River Métis. We have been shut out of housing for many years until your government came forward in 2018. But we've had a lot of experience at the same time, dealing with other issues of property management, social housing, and we're now very on our way on the various aspects on the spectrum of housing. However, I'm a little concerned about this urban-rural northern funding with respect to the new center that's going to be established, where it's unlikely that a nation-to-nation relationship will be developed. It's something that your Prime Minister and your predecessors have talked about a lot, government to government, nation to nation, and this puts barriers in the way for our nation, for our citizens. And again, we have the knowledge and the wherewithal to be able to do it. We can show amazing signs of success of actually doing construction and building in our communities. So I was hoping that I could put a bug in your ear. I also have President Chartrand with me, and if you don't run away immediately after this, I'm sure he's going to have a couple of words with you as well. But so I know I'm not short, but I just wanted to put that out there because it is an issue, and that we see it as a potential barrier for the substantial amount of money that you announced in the last two budgets. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And it's good to see you again, and President Chartrand. Good to see you in the room. The lights are sort of in my way, so I don't see you right now. So this is a terrific question. And I think for those who may not be aware, there's two major streams that we've made to invest in housing for Indigenous peoples in this country over the last number of federal budgets. The first was a $4 billion investment directly into distinctions-based groups that allows for communities to make decisions about housing in their own communities. Subsequently, we made a decision to advance an additional more than $4 billion to address a unique need of Indigenous peoples across Canada who no longer live in their communities, given the extraordinary need in urban, rural, and northern environments that has a disproportionate impact on Indigenous peoples. So we've made a decision to try to use that separate $4 billion through this urban, rural, and northern strategy to have a portion of it run through distinctions-based organizations in a manner similar to the direct funding that would have been provided through the distinction-based fund, but separately the creation of the center. And there's different perspectives I've heard on this, but one of the needs that we're trying to address recognizes that in some instances, communities know where their members are, and this is particularly impactful when you're dealing with the Red River Métis Nation, for example. They may know where their members are who live outside of their community. There are other people I've met with who do not know which nation they come from, who have been living in an urban, rural, or northern environment but have no relationships with the community that would, in theory, be responsible under a purely distinctions-based approach. So we're trying to meet competing needs, and it may be that some nations have the capacity and knowledge to deliver housing outcomes for members of their community who no longer live in the community, but there are other Indigenous peoples whose housing needs are going unmet that we believe will be solved by collaborating with a group designed to meet the housing needs of Indigenous peoples who may not have a relationship from the community from which they initially came. So there are no perfect solutions. Absolutely willing to work with with Métis peoples across Canada, with First Nations, with Inuit communities as well. But I think we need to do what we can to meet both the needs of people who maintain a connection to their historical community and people for whom that connection may have been severed. OK, alors j'ai envie de pratiquer, c'est difficile pour moi, c'est une nouvelle langue, mais je vais essayer.
On a des problèmes avec votre technologie, là, entre autres, là, pour s'inscrire.
Okay.
Là, okay, on me dit que...
Et pas plus long pour mes oreilles, s'il vous plaît.
En 2022, okay, on a promis 1,5 milliard de dollars pour les coopératives d'habitation. C'était dans le budget.
Ouais.
2023, 2024, à quoi est-ce qu'on peut s'attendre dans le futur? On a parlé du déficit, 4 % seulement au Canada pour le logement pour les personnes à faible et moyens revenus. Donc, c'est le temps peut-être de commencer à penser à nous donner des fonds pour qu'on puisse en créer. Merci.
OK, merci. Et, je pense que je comprends la question. Les logements abordables et coopératifs est une solution excellente, selon moi. Nous faisons des investissements dans le processus budgétaire, mais maintenant, nous avons besoin de finir le processus administratif. Je pense que nous avons l'habilité pour avancer ce fonds, si possible, ce printemps, juste quelques mois pour avancer des opportunités pour des groupes pour faire une application. Je ne veux pas rester ici sans action, mais je suis très proche d'avancer ce programme avec beaucoup d'argent pour soutenir des opportunités dans le secteur coopératif. Quand des organisations construisent des logements coopératifs sont des calculations pour des profits, c'est possible pour réduire les coûts de loyer permanent pour assurer des logements abordables aujourd'hui et dans l'avenir. Je m'excuse pour la qualité de mon français, but I think within the next few months we'll be able to advance the process and begin supporting once again on a permanent basis investments in affordable housing and cooperative housing specifically. Okay, merci, j'apprécie.
So we've got time. I'm going to take one more question here, and then we'll give you a chance to wrap up. But just a question from the audience here: How can governments help renters become homeowners and free up rental supply?
You know, it's funny because I would have flipped the question on its head, and how can we build more rental supply that will help free up space in the housing market? And the two are interconnected. One of the things that I have come to understand is if we actually build out more rental supply, that actually also helps people become homeowners. One of the things that you come to understand when you actually talk to people who are thinking about one day becoming homeowners, most people rent first. Unless you come from a family who's able to buy a home for you, most people end up renting for a period of their life. When you actually build out the rental supply, you end up putting a downward pressure on the cost to rent, which allows more people to save up a down payment to buy a home one day. Now, look, there are other things we can do to actually free up space in the market that exists today around short-term rentals, around speculation in the market with homes that are being used as a commodity, not as a residence for families. But when I actually think about what we can do, we need to build more rental stock. I do believe that we have a responsibility to attack that general fairness challenge, to create programs that make it easier to save up for that first home. But you have to be careful not to be so aggressive on the demand side that you gin up demand to a degree where you actually reduce the ability to provide the supply that the market demands. So it's a challenging situation, but the number one thing we can do is to build more rental supply to reduce pressure in the market, both for people who want to buy and people who are looking to rent now.
Right on. All right, and I know. Go ahead. Don't let me stop you. Sorry. I know there's a lot more questions, and I know you're. If time permits, you will stick around for a bit. But I'll just let you wrap. But I want to do it with a bit of a twist and say, if you, I'll give you the last word. But if you were to get 3 wishes, what would be your three housing wishes? But also, what would you ask of this audience? What would be your 2 or 3 requests of this audience?
If you got a lamp that I can rub while I make wishes, it's look, interesting question. First, if I could snap my fingers and double the pace of home building tomorrow, that would be a godsend for millions of Canadians in the years ahead. The second thing that I would do is make sure that as we build out that supply, is making sure it's the right kind of supply. If it's all market housing, there's still going to be too many Canadians who go to bed without a roof over their head. And the third is that we actually create a sense of hope, not out of senseless optimism, but facts that allow a person to plan for the housing, a young person to plan for the housing that they actually want for themselves or maybe their families in the future. So if you give me 3 wishes, those are the 3 areas that I'd try to tackle. I think you said the 2 things that we'd ask.
Ask of this.
So first is don't leave it to government. The solutions exist in communities. The people who know how to solve the problem are sitting next to you right now. For God's sakes, work with one another to identify solutions that can be repeated and scaled across the country. But of a related note, though I say don't leave it to government, don't let government off the hook. I'm not going to be in this job forever. There will inevitably be some future housing minister who doesn't believe that we should be investing in housing. Be loud about this. Don't take for granted that the momentum we've seen over the past few months on the need to build more homes, to scale home building, is something that we can take as a given. If you hear elected officials at any level of government adopt NIMBY attitudes, make sure they have that conversation in public. Listen to the testimony that's playing out at municipal councils across Canada. We live stream council meetings in our office in Ottawa. And the most powerful things that I've seen is when you get a handful of 20-somethings show up at a council meeting who didn't plan to speak and take to the microphone. And I think every elected official in Ottawa should be listening to those council meetings, because the problems they're talking about are whether they're going to be able to live in the community where their families are, whether they're going to be able to pursue an opportunity for themselves. And we can create opportunities for an entire generation of people, but not if people let politicians off the hook. So don't leave it to government, advance the solutions that you all know exist, but when you see people adopt NIMBY attitudes or say that governments don't belong in the home building sector anymore, confront them in a public way. Make them answer to all Canadians, not just the room of people that the message may be catered for.
Right on. Well, thank you, Minister. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it.